Hi, I'm Mohit Yadav, co-founder at Bolt, India's largest EV charging network. And I'm here today to talk about the current state of EV charging infra in India, what we are doing today here at Bolt to add to it, how the future looks like, and some few key things to consider while developing the charging infra. So, as we are already aware, we are witnessing a boom in EVs. More than 200 million EVs will be on road by 2030, and the industry is already attracting some very significant investment. In fact, more than $100 billion have been invested in the electric and connected market since the beginning of 2020. Shifting our focus a little bit to India, the Indian EV industry alone will be more than $200 billion if India meets its 30 at 30 objective. And in fact, over the last 2 years, despite the pandemic, India has seen a rapid increase in the penetration of electric vehicles. And this has been spearheaded by two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which are the first ones to convert to electric. As we transition to this new era of electric mobility, we see that lack of charging infra is the biggest roadblock for EV adoption. If you ask anyone, why aren't they moving to an EV? The first question that they tell you is, where would I charge, right? And the thing that has been working for fuel vehicles for years is simply absent for electric vehicles. That is a robust infrastructure to power them. It is estimated that India will sell about 100 million electric vehicles by 2030, and two-wheelers will form more than 90% of this number. And the key takeaway here is that millions of these electric vehicles that are coming on road, most of them would be two-wheeler and three-wheeler. So the way EV infrastructure evolves in India would be very different from how it evolved in developed countries. It's not hard to see that these millions of these electric vehicles would need millions of charging points. To cite an example, it is estimated that a city like Delhi would need more than at least 20 lakh charging points, and a city like Lucknow would need at least 6 lakhs, more than 6 lakhs charging points. So we see that there are hundreds and millions of electric vehicles coming to India in the future, and these would need millions of charging points. Each vehicle would at least need one charging point to begin with, right? So how do we solve it? The number of charging points that would be there in the market would be so much that they would simply become a commodity, and electricity would become the new fuel. So how do we solve this issue or problem of setting up millions of charging points at an affordable cost without making the country pay too much for it? Our answer is the Bolt charging network, world's largest, densest, and most affordable charging network. What we are doing here at Bolt Charging Network is, it's a network of extremely affordable slow charging points, which can be plugged into any regular household electricity supply, can be set up in 30 minutes. And what it does, it reduces the cost of setting up the charging infrastructure. It gives you a way of monitoring and monetizing the electricity dispensed through the existing EV infra, hence reducing the need of deploying special electricity lines for electric vehicles. Second, it does not have any operational expense. It works via Wi-Fi, it also works via Bluetooth, and does not require any recurring cost. And fourth, and probably the best part about this is, it's peer-to-peer. Because it's so affordable, people buy one for themselves, and when they are not using their charging point, they share it with others and generate some passive income. So they not only solve the problem for themselves, but also become a part of the solution. So what makes Bolt Network so special? First of all, we design, develop, manufacture, and operate the largest EV charging point network in India. We have more than 10,000 plus charging points in 100 plus cities. And our clients and partners include all leading EV OEMs and infrastructure management players such as MyGate, Park Plus, and so on. And as an ecosystem player with B2B clients on the EV OEM side and B2C clients on the EV charging infra side, we are perfectly positioned to leverage all this information that we are getting. This information tells us the current state of the market today. Where are these vehicles charged? What are their energy requirements? How much energy do two-wheelers need? How much energy does a four-wheeler need? And when people move to these electric modes of transportation, how much would add to their electricity costs? So Shifting our focus a little bit to the future, how does the path forward for EV charging in India look like? So if you take a look at this picture right here, EV ecosystem comprises of EV OEMs, component makers, fleet services, and last but certainly not the least, EV charging infrastructure value chain. There are a lot of stakeholders here, the DISCOM, charge point operators, mobility service providers, and of course, EV end users. In our opinion, the charge point operators and mobility service providers form the most crucial part of this value chain and are perfectly placed to expand across the same. They are also currently the most active players in the market and, and have a huge first mover advantage. And the key takeaway here is that for charge point operators, the EV ecosystem is all about scaling and providing a ubiquitous charging network. And for mobility service providers, the key to success will depend on how well they can expand their network and diversify their operations in collaboration with the largest charging point operators. So CPOs cater to the supply and MSPs create the demand. Now, as we are on this journey of electric mobility, transitioning to electric mobility, what are the key things that we need to consider while building the EV infra for India? From our experience, and we've been doing this for about 2 years now, what we have seen is that large scale public charging infra may not be required in several cities. It would predominantly be required in tier 1 cities where parking is an issue. In cities in tier 2 and tier 3 cities where people have individual homes, they will simply put a charging point for themselves and share it with others, and that would solve 99% of the use cases. Second, India is a two-wheeler and three-wheeler led market by volumes. And the energy requirement for these vehicles is very low compared to cars and buses. So in fact, you would be surprised if I told you a typical two-wheeler or three-wheeler takes lesser energy than your air conditioner or a geyser. So the way we go about building our charging infra has to take into consideration the market share of two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And third, the data and analytics around EV charging for improved grid management will emerge as a new business opportunity. As the demand for electricity grows, DISCOMs will need data on how they can invest and where they should invest to increase the current EV infrastructure. So as India is moving towards this electric mobility and each city is becoming EV ready one after the other, what are the key factors to take in mind while planning the deployment of EV charging infrastructure? So the first thing is the business model. We have to ensure that the EV charging infrastructure allows for the creation of an EV charging marketplace, because business models that relies solely on revenue generated from EV charging are not financially feasible. Second, we need to quantify the charging needs for a city. Any EV charging infra that is being set up should empower the DISCOMs to manage the grid loads, charging location and times, number of charges required, future grid planning and investment. And third, and certainly the most important part of it, is the Indian EV consumer, which is extremely conscious of the pricing. We cannot expect an EV revolution to happen in India if the cost of setting up the charging infra is way too high. Second, the public still lacks a certain level of awareness in terms of range anxiety and the kind of charging infrastructure they require for charging their vehicles. For example, many people are not aware that two-wheelers and three-wheelers simply do not take a lot of electricity, and they can simply use their home charging for their charging needs. Now, as each city becomes EV ready, what are the key things we should look at before planning the development of EV charging infra? The first thing is the business model. Charging station business models that rely solely on direct revenue from EV charging services are currently not financially feasible. Hence, we should ensure that the EV charging infrastructure allows for the creation of an EV charging marketplace, allowing good hosts to become winners and also allow trading of energy based on demand and supply. Second, the EV infrastructure should help in quantifying charging needs for a city. DISCOM needs information on grid loads, charging location and time, number of charges required, And also they need a lot of information from the charging infrastructure for future grid planning and investment. And third, and certainly the most important, is the Indian EV consumer, which is extremely conscious of pricing. We can't expect an EV revolution to happen if the cost of setting up the EV infrastructure is too expensive. So we have looked at the current state of EV infra in India, what we are doing here at Bolt, and some strategic recommendations while deploying an EV charging infra. Now, coming to the last part of the presentation, what we can do today to accelerate EV adoption. First things first, government, industry, and media need to work together to address concerns about range anxiety, charging infra woes for light electric vehicles. These vehicles do not require a lot of electric capacity and can simply be charged at home. We need to educate people about this so that they can solve this problem for themselves and share their charging points to solve it for others. Second, we need to develop EV programs that offer incentives for charging systems with some automated control capabilities. So what I'm trying to say here is that with millions of charging points being deployed, there should be an option to control them remotely. We can't expect to put a person in front of each of these charging points and expect it to be financially viable. Third, discoms need to suggest the right pricing signals for EV customers to optimize grid balancing efforts. What this means is that EV charging is a commodity and electricity is the new fuel. So discoms need to be very clear about their policies on how electricity can be shared, what is the policy around EV lines, and how sharing of electricity can happen between different EV end users. In the end, I would like to conclude on the note that we must act now to help India transition to a green, shared, and connected mobility future by scaling up our charging facilities, as this will help India position itself on the front of the ongoing global transition to clean mobility. Thank you very much. If you are more interested in what we are doing here at Bolt, please visit www.bolt.earth for more information. Thank you.